I still remember the way the rain sounded that evening. Soft, scattered drops tapping against the window like hesitant confessions. It was late October 2018, a gray, damp kind of day in Seattle where the clouds hang so low you can almost feel their weight pressing on your chest. My wife, Emily, was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone, a half-finished cup of chamomile tea beside her. I was cooking, or pretending to. The truth is, I'd been more focused on her than on the sizzling pan. Something about the way she stared at her screen, smiling faintly to herself, had started to bother me. Not because of jealousy exactly, but because I hadn't seen that particular smile in a long time. That quiet, private kind of happiness that doesn't need anyone else's company. At that point, we'd been married for 8 years. Our anniversary was coming up, November 10th. We met in 2009 at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those warm summer evenings that feel endless. Emily was wearing this mustard yellow sundress, her hair pulled into a messy bun, freckles dancing across her nose. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. She was calm, kind, grounded. The kind of woman who seemed to find joy in simple things, baking bread, hiking trails, watching old movies on a Sunday night. I fell for her slowly, the way you fall asleep, all at once but so quietly you hardly notice when it happens. Life after marriage wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable. We both had jobs we didn't hate. I worked as a project manager for a construction firm downtown, and Emily was a nurse at a local hospital. Our schedules were hectic, especially hers. There were nights she'd come home after midnight, exhausted and quiet, her scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion. I used to greet her with a warm dinner, a hug, sometimes even a stupid joke to lighten the mood. But over time, things shifted. Not all at once, but like slow erosion. It started with little things. The texts she stopped replying to during her breaks. The way she'd take longer showers. How her phone suddenly started facing down on the counter. I'd catch her smiling at notifications, then quickly locking the screen. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. Emily wasn't the kind of woman to cheat. We'd gone through everything together, moving states, losing my father, paying off student loans, even struggling through infertility for 2 long, painful years. We were each other's anchors when everything else felt like quicksand. But there was a distance now, invisible but impossible to ignore. Conversations became mechanical, like we were reading scripts written for strangers. She laughed less, avoided eye contact more. Her hugs were shorter, her I love you felt rehearsed. And the worst part was that I couldn't pinpoint when it all started to fade. It's terrifying when you realize love doesn't die dramatically, it just quietly starves from neglect. That October night, while we sat eating dinner in silence, she got a call. Her phone lit up on the counter. She glanced at it, then stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the tile. She said it was from the hospital, but her voice trembled just enough to make me notice. She walked into the other room and I could hear the faint murmur of her voice. I didn't move, but my heart started beating faster, like it already knew something I didn't. When she came back, her expression was different, softer, distracted. She apologized for taking the call and said a patient needed an early morning check. I nodded. I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to believe her. Because if I didn't, I'd have to face a truth I wasn't ready for. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures from our honeymoon in Maui, her 30th birthday party, the day we adopted our golden retriever. Based on those photos, we looked happy, genuinely happy. I stared at them for so long, trying to figure out when the smiles had stopped being real. The next few days were strange. Emily seemed lighter, almost cheerful. She'd hum while making breakfast, wear perfume even on her off days, and spend extra time getting ready. I told myself it was just stress lifting, maybe work had been hard and she was finally catching a break. But deep down, something twisted inside me every time I saw her smile, that secret smile again. The breaking point, though I didn't realize it then, started with a ring. Not her ring, but one I wasn't supposed to see. It was early November, about a week before our anniversary. She'd left her purse on the couch before heading to the bathroom. I wasn't snooping, or at least that's what I told myself. I just wanted to get her wallet because we needed to order takeout. But when I unzipped the purse, a small velvet box caught my eye. My heart jumped. For a brief shining second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was planning something for our anniversary. A surprise. A renewal of vows maybe. I smiled to myself, feeling stupid for doubting her. I picked up the box, already imagining her teary eyes and nervous laughter as she'd explain the surprise. But when I opened it, the air left my lungs. It was a man's ring, thick, silver, engraved with initials that weren't mine. The inscription inside said J&E, always. I stared at it for what felt like forever, the world blurring around me. The sound of the running shower in the distance, Max's paws tapping on the hardwood floor, everything felt muffled like I was underwater. My throat tightened, my stomach twisted, and the first thought that hit me wasn't anger. It was disbelief. I wanted to laugh, cry, throw up all at once. Who the hell was Jay? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to Emily, who was breathing softly, her hair spilling across the pillow like nothing had changed. I kept replaying the discovery in my head, trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was a gift for her brother, Jason. Maybe she'd bought it for a friend's wedding. But the engraving, always, there was nothing friendly about that. Over the next few days, my world started unraveling. Every little thing she did suddenly felt suspicious. The late shifts, the new perfume, the way she smiled at text. I wanted to confront her right then, demand an explanation. But something stopped me, fear. Not fear of losing her, but fear of confirming what I already suspected. Because once I said it out loud, it would become real. So I played along, pretended everything was fine. I even suggested we go out for our anniversary dinner early, and she agreed, though her hesitation was obvious. I could tell she had other plans. Maybe with him. Maybe Jay, and that's when I decided I'd find out the truth myself. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would shatter the last pieces of the life I thought I had. That night, as I stared out the rain-streaked window, I realized something painful. Love doesn't just end. Sometimes it rots quietly while you keep pretending it's alive, and I was about to watch mine decay right before my eyes. The morning after I found the ring, everything felt wrong. The light seeping through our bedroom curtains was too bright, the sound of the coffee machine too loud, even Max's tail wagging against the wall irritated me. Emily moved through our home like nothing had happened, humming softly while buttering her toast. I sat across from her, pretending to read emails on my phone, but all I could think about was that silver ring, that tiny box hidden inside her purse like a secret heartbeat. I told myself I'd confront her that day. I even rehearsed what I'd say, something calm, rational, controlled. But when she looked up and smiled at me, that same gentle, practiced smile she'd been giving me for months, I froze. The words caught in my throat. Instead, I asked her what her plans were for the day. She said she had another long shift at the hospital, maybe until midnight. She apologized, saying she'd make it up to me this weekend. I nodded. My hands were trembling beneath the table. After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the half-eaten toast she'd left behind. My head was a storm of what-ifs. What if she really was seeing someone? What if Jay was another nurse or a doctor? The thought made me sick. I'd always trusted her blindly. She had friends at work, mostly men, sure, but I'd never once felt threatened by that. That's how much faith I had in her. That's how naive I'd been. By noon, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't live in uncertainty anymore. I called in sick and drove to the hospital where she worked. I knew the layout. I dropped her off countless times before. I parked across the street feeling ridiculous like some jealous husband in a bad soap opera. But as I sat there, watching the sliding glass doors open and close, my heart pounded with a kind of dread I couldn't suppress. After about 20 minutes, I saw her, Emily, stepping out of the hospital entrance. Still in her scrubs, but instead of heading toward her car, she walked to the side street where a black sedan was parked. A man stepped out. Tall, athletic build, maybe early 40s, clean-cut, confident, wearing a navy jacket. He smiled at her in a way that was far too familiar. And then she smiled back. Not the polite smile she gave to patients or neighbors. This one was softer, warmer, the kind of smile that had once been mine. She reached for him, and for a brief, unbearable moment, their hands brushed. It wasn't an accident. It was intimate. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. It felt like time slowed, like the universe had gone silent just to let me drown in that moment. She got into his car. They drove off. I followed. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself I was only going to follow for a minute, just to see where they were going, to make sense of what I was seeing. But 1 minute turned into 20, then 30. They drove across town through the gray drizzle until they reached a quiet residential neighborhood near Green Lake. The kind of place with tree-lined streets and houses that smelled of money and quiet secrets. They parked in front of a white, two-story home with blue shutters. She stepped out, laughing at something he said. Then they walked toward the door together, and she took out a key. That key felt like a knife. I didn't need to see more. I drove away before they went inside, my chest burning, vision blurred with tears I didn't even realize had fallen. I pulled over near a park and sat there for hours, just staring at nothing. People jogged past me, kids played on swings, dogs barked in the distance. Life carried on, utterly indifferent to my world collapsing. That night, Emily came home late, just like she said she would. Her scrubs were gone. She was wearing jeans and a cozy sweater, hair slightly damp from the rain. She kissed my cheek and said her shift had been exhausting. I nodded, my throat dry, my mind screaming. I could smell faint traces of cologne on her clothes. Not hers, not mine. When she went to shower, I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart thudding so hard it hurt. I stared at her phone on the nightstand. It was right there. All I had to do was pick it up. I did. The lock screen showed a text preview. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was perfect. From Jason W. So it wasn't just a random man. It was Jason Walker, her co-worker. I'd met him once, a friendly, charming doctor who'd been at one of her hospital Christmas parties. I remember he'd shaken my hand and said, "Emily always talks about how proud she is of you." I'd smiled back then, thinking what a good guy he was. Now I wanted to break his face, but I didn't. I just sat there, paralyzed. The truth was right in front of me, glowing on the screen, undeniable. And yet, I didn't know what to do with it. Confronting her meant ending everything. Our home, our plans, our marriage. But pretending nothing was wrong meant slowly destroying myself. The next morning, she woke up cheerful. I barely spoke. My silence didn't bother her. If anything, she seemed relieved I wasn't asking questions. Maybe she thought I was too blind to see. For the next few days, I lived like a ghost. I went to work, came home, smiled when required. Inside, I was hollow. Every small thing reminded me of her betrayal. The smell of her shampoo, the sound of her laughter, the sight of her wedding ring catching the light as she texted him under the table. Then, on November 10th, our anniversary, she told me she'd made dinner reservations. Her tone was excited, her eyes almost guilty. I wanted to cancel, to scream, to expose her right there. But something inside me whispered, wait, I don't know if it was revenge or closure I wanted. Maybe both. That evening, she dressed beautifully, a navy dress, the same one she wore the night I proposed. She said it was for old time's sake. My chest tightened. I drove us to the restaurant she'd picked, a quiet Italian place downtown we used to love. Candlelight, soft jazz, the faint scent of garlic and wine. Everything should have felt romantic, nostalgic. Instead, it felt like standing in the ruins of something sacred. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the restroom. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. My hands were trembling. I knew what I had to do. When I returned, she was scrolling on her phone under the table. I could see the faint smile tugging at her lips. I sat down, and for the first time in weeks, I looked at her directly. I told her I'd found the ring. The world seemed to stop. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then her eyes filled with tears. Big, trembling tears that spilled down her cheeks before she even tried to speak. She said she could explain. Of course she did. They always can. She told me it wasn't what I thought, that things just happened, that she'd been feeling lost, lonely, neglected, that Jason understood her in ways I didn't anymore, that he was going through a divorce and they'd become close. It was emotional at first, she said, then physical. She swore she was going to end it. I didn't say a word. I just listened. My chest felt like it was caving in. The woman I'd shared my life with, my dreams with, she was sitting across from me, crying, confessing, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just emptiness. When she said she loved me, I almost laughed. Love doesn't coexist with deceit. Love doesn't live in secrecy in hotel rooms. The waiter came by, awkwardly glancing between us. She wiped her tears, pretending everything was fine. I wanted to disappear. We drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past the windshield, glowing like smudged memories. When we pulled into the driveway, she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. She broke down then, sobbing, apologizing, begging me to believe her. But belief is fragile. Once it's shattered, no amount of tears can rebuild it. I slept on the couch that night. She stayed in the bedroom, crying softly until she fell asleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that my life had split in two, the before and the after. And the after had only just begun, because betrayal doesn't end with confession. It festers. It rewrites who you are, and in the weeks that followed, I'd learned that the pain of knowing the truth is sometimes worse than the lie itself. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through fog, thick, heavy, and suffocating. I was home, but not really. Emily moved around as if everything was normal, humming while doing laundry, rearranging the living room cushions, making coffee with that faint smile that used to comfort me. I hated that smile. It had become a weapon, a reminder of everything she'd hidden from me. Work became unbearable. I'd always prided myself on being good at my job, a project manager with a reputation for keeping deadlines tight and clients happy. But now, every blueprint, every email, every phone call felt meaningless. I couldn't focus. My mind replayed the image of her hand brushing against Jason's outside that hospital. The text messages, the ring. I began snapping at colleagues over minor things, missing details I normally wouldn't have, and eventually, my boss pulled me aside. "Everything okay, Shubham?" he asked. I smiled and said yes, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. No one could understand the storm inside me, the humiliation, the grief, the disbelief that someone I loved so deeply could betray me with such casual cruelty. At home, the tension was palpable. Emily tried to talk to me, to reach me, but I couldn't. I'd stop mid-sentence, walk away, or retreat into another room. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, imagining their moments together, dinner dates, hotel rooms, stolen kisses, imagining her happiness with someone else while I slept on the floor like a ghost in my own home. I started isolating myself. I stopped meeting friends, stopped answering calls, stopped going out. I even stopped playing with Max. He'd whine, nuzzle my hand, and I'd push him away, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't want to feel anything. Not joy, not love, not comfort. Family tried to help. My parents, always loving and supportive, noticed my withdrawal. They came over one Sunday with casseroles and forced cheer. I smiled, nodded, ate a little, but it was all mechanical. I could hear them whispering after she left, asking if everything was okay. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything, but I couldn't. There was a shame in betrayal, not hers, but mine. A shame that I'd been blind, that I hadn't seen the signs, that I'd been made a fool in my own life. Then came the first fight. Not big, not explosive, but enough to make the walls of our home feel like they were closing in. I'd found her phone lying on the counter. She'd left it unlocked, and saw another text from Jason. Something flippant, something that mocked me without saying my name. I confronted her. She cried, I yelled. The words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "How could you? How could you do this to us?" Her response made my blood run cold. She said she hadn't planned for it to go this far, that she didn't know she'd hurt me like this, that she still loved me but couldn't ignore her feelings for him. That night, she slept on the bed while I stayed on the couch, my fists clenching and unclenching as if I could squeeze the pain out of my chest. I started thinking about our friends, the people who'd known us since college. Did they know? Did they see it coming? Was there gossip spreading behind my back while I sat at work, pretending life was normal? I couldn't trust anyone. Every interaction felt suspect, every smile potentially hiding judgment or betrayal. I even considered moving out, packing a bag and disappearing for a week, just to escape the weight of her presence and the sting of her deceit. But I stayed. Partly because I couldn't imagine starting over at 32, partly because I still clung to a shred of hope that she'd come back, not to me, but to herself. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. One day she'd be affectionate, touch my hand, kiss my cheek. The next, she'd leave without explanation, claiming long shifts or errands. I caught her lying more frequently. Small things at first, little lies that seemed innocent but cut deeper than a knife. She'd say she was with a friend at Starbucks while her phone pinged with a message from Jason saying, "See you soon." I began keeping a journal. Not to document her actions, but to track my own thoughts, my own emotional decay. I wrote about the sadness that didn't have a name, about the anger that had no outlet, about the sleepless nights and the mornings when I'd wake up feeling like a stranger in my own home. I wrote about my shame, my confusion, my longing. And sometimes late at night, I'd write letters I never intended to send. Letters telling her exactly what she'd done to me, how she'd ruined my trust, how her betrayal had left me hollow. Financial stress added another layer. Our apartment lease was coming up. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else with her, but leaving meant losing everything we'd built together. The thought of moving into a new place without her made me feel like I was already dead inside, like a man wandering through someone else's life. Then came the subtle social fallout. Friends started picking sides, consciously or unconsciously. Some asked if everything was okay, while others avoided the topic entirely. Invitations to gatherings dried up. The people who once knew me as calm, reliable, and funny now looked at me with a mix of pity and uncertainty. I stopped posting on social media, stopped sharing even the most mundane parts of my life. I didn't want anyone to see the cracks forming in me, but the cracks were too deep to hide. I sought therapy. Not because I thought I was losing my mind, but because I didn't want to. I needed someone to help me navigate the aftermath of something so personal, so devastating, and so utterly transformative. The sessions were exhausting. I'd sit in the chair, staring at the floor, and talk about the betrayal, about the nights I cried alone, about the constant gnawing in my chest. My therapist didn't offer platitudes. She just listened, nodded, and asked me the questions I was too afraid to ask myself. What do you need right now? What can you control? I didn't have answers. There was nothing to control. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my love, my marriage, had been rewritten overnight. At some point, I realized that anger wasn't enough. Sadness wasn't enough. The emptiness, the hollow grief, the endless questioning. These feelings became the foundation for the next phase of my life. I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what had happened. But I could do something about the life I still had. And that's when the seed of something dangerous, something consuming, started to grow. The need for clarity, the need for justice, the need to reclaim what was mine. I began documenting everything: messages, receipts, dates. I kept a detailed record of her comings and goings, of her texts with Jason, of the subtle lies she told. Partly it was for myself, partly it was for evidence. I didn't yet know if I'd confront her publicly, take legal steps, or simply wait for her to slip further. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stay a victim. During this time, my friends became my silent anchors. Not all of them, but a few who knew me long enough to see the truth in my eyes without needing words. They offered quiet support: a beer after work, a gym session, a call late at night. They reminded me I wasn't completely alone, that my life didn't have to end because hers had betrayed me. The months blurred together. Emily and I existed in the same space but not the same world. Every touch, every word, every glance was layered with tension and unspoken truths. And while part of me wanted to confront her fully, to break everything and finally release the pain, another part waited, watched, and planned. Because betrayal is like fire. It burns everything it touches. And fire can also forge strength if you survive it. By early January, I had made a choice. I wasn't going to crumble under this. I wouldn't let the betrayal define the rest of my life. But I also wasn't going to forgive blindly. I needed control. I needed agency. And I needed to make sure that the person who shattered my world, Emily, Jason, or both, understood the gravity of what they had done. That decision marked the turning point. Not the moment I confronted her, not the moment I found the ring, but the moment I decided I would take back my life, piece by piece, with or without her. The fallout had done its damage on my trust, my sense of security, my emotional stability, but now it was time for action, and what came next would change everything. By mid-January 2019, I had transformed from someone hollowed by betrayal into someone calculating, focused, and painfully aware of every step I needed to take. It wasn't about revenge in a petty sense. It was about reclaiming my life, reclaiming my dignity, and ensuring that the betrayal wouldn't define me or my future. The days were still gray, The rain still relentless in Seattle, but my perspective had shifted. Pain had become fuel. I started small. I changed my routines, my environment, my mindset. I joined a local gym, not for fitness, though I did gain some, but to build mental resilience. I began waking up earlier, journaling in the quiet before sunrise, pouring out the dark swirl of anger and grief into pages I would never show anyone. I started analyzing our finances carefully, knowing that if this marriage ended, I'd need security. Every little detail became a strategy. Where she went, who she talked to, what her habits were. I cataloged it all without letting it consume me entirely. I also began observing her more closely. Emily, in her typical way, thought I was spiraling into despair. She didn't notice my calm detachment, the way I'd silently follow her online presence, subtly track her social media posts, and cross-reference them with what she said in conversation. Her face still held that familiar softness, but I saw the tension now, the guilt she couldn't hide completely, the careful wording of messages, the forced laughter. And Jason? The man was arrogant, oblivious, and careless. Their relationship wasn't the clandestine, flawless affair she imagined. It had cracks, and I was cataloging everyone. The next step was confrontation, but on my terms. I didn't rush. I didn't shout or accuse. I observed, waited, and prepared. I needed leverage, evidence that would make the truth undeniable. I began photographing subtle signs, receipts for dinner dates, snapshots of text conversations when her phone was unattended, screenshots of social media interactions that painted a clear picture of her infidelity. I felt no joy in it, only clarity. I wasn't doing this for revenge against them. I was doing it to reclaim control over my life. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild myself. Work became my anchor. Projects I'd once taken for granted were now missions. I took on challenging assignments, even volunteering for extra shifts. My colleagues noticed the change, the quiet confidence, the razor-sharp focus. They didn't know why I'd transformed, and I didn't need them to. What mattered was that I was no longer the man beaten down by betrayal. I was rising, slowly, deliberately. Friends became another lifeline. One night, over beers with my closest friend, Ravi, I admitted more than I ever had before. I told him about the ring, about the texts, about my sense of drowning in my own home. Ravi didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, "She'll come back to you." Instead, he said, "Shubham, you can't change her choices, but you can control what you do next." His words were simple, almost mundane, but they struck a chord. I realized the fight wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, my life, and my future. Then, one cold February evening, I executed the plan I'd been preparing. Emily came home, smiling as if she owned the world. I didn't respond. I simply placed the velvet box, the ring, on the dining table in front of her, alongside a carefully printed set of evidence, receipts, screenshots, notes detailing the timeline of her betrayal. I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. She froze. Her hands trembled. Her eyes went wide as she realized the extent of my knowledge. Tears streamed down her face, but this time I felt nothing but resolve. "This," I said finally, voice calm but firm, "is not about punishment. It's about truth, and truth has consequences." She tried to reach for the box, but I pulled it back, placing it out of her reach. I could see the panic in her eyes, not guilt for her actions, but fear of the unraveling she'd caused. Jason, I later learned, had been careless. The evidence was meticulous. She couldn't deny it, and I didn't need her to. My control was in the knowledge, in the quiet power of clarity. The days that followed were awkward, tense, and surreal. She pleaded, apologized, promised change. I listened, nodded, and maintained the boundaries I'd set. I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was strategic. Every interaction was measured, every word deliberate. Meanwhile, I began to focus on what really mattered, my own healing and growth. I started traveling again, short trips, hikes, weekends exploring nearby cities. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected. I explored hobbies I'd abandoned during the haze of marital life: photography, long runs in the rain, reading novels that transported me to worlds untouched by betrayal. Slowly, joy crept back into my life, not the forced happiness of before, but a quiet, self-earned contentment. By spring, Emily and Jason's affair had started to crumble. Small mistakes, moments of carelessness, and the undeniable evidence I had amassed caused tension and arguments. I never interfered directly. I didn't need to. Observing from the distance I'd created, I watched as their relationship began to falter under the weight of reality. They underestimated me, assumed my silence meant weakness. But I had something. They didn't. The ability to survive, to endure, and to reclaim my narrative. I also started considering the future. My marriage, as it had existed, was over. But I didn't want bitterness to dictate my life. I thought about moving into a new place, redecorating, and creating a home that reflected who I had become rather than who I had been. I began researching new neighborhoods, imagining furniture, envisioning walls painted in colors that felt alive, not oppressive. Financially, I made careful plans. I consulted with a financial advisor, rearranged accounts, and prepared for independence. Every step was deliberate. Every action reinforced the fact that I was reclaiming power over my life. Betrayal could take love from me, but it could not take my agency. Then, one March evening, the culmination of months of observation and preparation came to fruition. I received an anonymous message, or perhaps a deliberate slip, that Jason had ended things with Emily. She called me that night, sobbing, admitting everything had gone wrong, that their relationship was unsustainable. And for the first time since October, I felt a sense of closure. I didn't gloat. I didn't revel in their downfall. I simply listened, offered no sympathy, and maintained the calm detachment I'd cultivated. The point had never been revenge. It had been survival, reclamation, and restoration. By the end of March, my life had shifted dramatically. Emily had moved out temporarily to stay with her sister. I had taken control of my space, my routines, and my mindset. Work, friends, hobbies, everything became intentional. Every small victory, from a well-executed project to a quiet morning, run, reinforced that I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. Looking back, the months of fallout, pain, and observation had done something unexpected. They had transformed me. Betrayal had tried to break me, but instead it forged a version of myself I didn't know existed. Stronger, resilient, self-aware, and unwilling to let someone else dictate my happiness. And in that quiet strength, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. A sense of self unbroken by love lost, unshaken by deceit, and unafraid to step forward into a life I would define on my own terms. By April 2019, the fog had lifted. Not completely, but enough that I could breathe again without feeling like my chest would collapse. Emily had moved out, Jason had disappeared from both our lives, and the apartment, once a prison of betrayal, felt like a blank canvas. I still felt anger, sure, but it was no longer a sharp, stabbing pain. It had dulled into something colder, more rational, a tool I could use to remind myself what I'd survived. The first few weeks alone were strange. The silence of the apartment was profound, almost deafening. I wandered from room to room, tracing my hands along the furniture, noticing the small details I'd never appreciated before. The way sunlight hit the hardwood in the afternoon, the faint creak of the kitchen floor when I walked to make coffee, the smell of pine from the candle I'd lit weeks ago to mask the lingering scent of her perfume. Everything was mine now, and it had to feel that way, completely mine. I started small rituals, little acts of reclamation. I painted the bedroom walls a soft gray with hints of blue, something calming but alive. I rearranged the living room, placed Max's bed in the corner where I could see him while reading. I bought myself a new laptop, one that wasn't a hand-me-down from her surprise gifts, and set up a small workspace overlooking the window. The act of organizing my physical space mirrored what I was doing internally, constructing boundaries, setting limits, building a life independent of anyone else's influence. Friends became a lifeline, not just emotional but social. Ravi, Sarah, and a few others became my chosen family. We hiked, traveled to nearby cities, had late-night talks about everything: betrayal, ambition, love, and loss. I laughed again, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes freely, and each laugh felt like a stitch slowly sewing together the parts of me I'd lost. Work was no longer just a distraction. It became a source of purpose. Projects that once felt tedious now had weight. I thrived under deadlines, earned promotions, and discovered a newfound respect from colleagues who had never seen me so focused and assertive. There was power in reclaiming control, in proving that betrayal couldn't define my career or my reputation. Financial independence became another frontier. I invested carefully, saved intentionally, and even started planning for a small property of my own. The sense of control this brought was intoxicating. I could see the life I wanted, one not dictated by someone else's choices, whims, or deceit. It was deliberate, planned, and mine. Then in June, Emily reached out. Not for reconciliation, I would never allow that, but for closure, or perhaps ego, or maybe guilt. She sent a long email detailing regrets, admissions, excuses, and apologies. I read it carefully, each line reminding me of why I had built these boundaries. The betrayal was real, the loss palpable, but the power had shifted. I was no longer the hurt husband. I was a man who had endured, survived, and rebuilt. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence was the only response that could convey the gravity of what had happened. Words could not express what I had rebuilt inside myself. My life was no longer contingent on her, on Jason, or on the betrayal that had once threatened to consume me. As the months rolled into fall, I began dating again, cautiously, tentatively. At first, it was just coffee, walks in the park, and slow conversations. But I discovered something unexpected. I could love again, but differently. More carefully, more deliberately, with awareness and boundaries that protected me. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I had learned that love is fragile, yes, but self-respect is essential. And without it, love becomes dangerous. Even Max seemed to sense the change. He followed me on morning runs, sat beside me while I read, and nuzzled me in a way that felt grounding. In some ways, his unwavering loyalty reminded me of what I deserved: honesty, consistency, and unconditional love. By winter 2019, I had made peace with the past. Emily and I existed in separate spheres, and the shadow of betrayal no longer dictated my emotions or decisions. I had learned something painful but invaluable. Life does not end with betrayal. It transforms you, forces you to confront your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, your deepest fears. And if you survive, you come out stronger, wiser, and more deliberate in every choice you make. I still think about her sometimes, not with longing, but with clarity. I remember the laughter, the small moments of tenderness, the dreams we shared. But I also remember the ring, the texts, the betrayal. Those memories are not poison anymore. They are reminders. Proof that I endured, proof that I can survive unimaginable pain, and proof that I am capable of building a life entirely on my terms. The final lesson, the one that resonates even now, is simple yet profound. Trust yourself first. Love yourself fiercely. And when someone betrays you, let it break your illusions, but never let it break your spirit. Because survival is not just about enduring. It's about transforming, reclaiming, and emerging into a life where your own happiness is not negotiable. I sit now in my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, Max curled at my feet, a cup of coffee in my hand, and a sense of calm I hadn't known for years. The ring is long gone, returned, discarded, or kept as a memory I no longer fear. Emily is a chapter, Jason a footnote, and me, I am the story continuing, evolving, alive, and unbroken. And the truth I've carried, the pain I've survived, has become a quiet, unwavering power that no one can ever take away, because some stories don't end with closure. They end with transformation. And mine, the one forged in betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimate resilience, has only just begun.